The scent of ionized air and expensive cologne usually signaled safety in the high-rise offices of the city, but tonight, it smelled like a trap. Clara Sterling pressed her back against the cold mahogany door of her private study, her breath hitching in her throat. Outside, the muffled rhythmic thud of heavy boots on plush carpeting told her the men in gray suits weren't there to negotiate her father's merger anymore. They were there for her. Her pulse hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of silk and terrified ambition. She had money, she had status, but in this moment she had no shield. Then the shadows in the corner of the room shifted. He hadn't been there a second ago. Or perhaps he had, and he was simply that good at becoming part of the darkness. A man stood there, tall and imposing, dressed in a tactical suit that looked far too expensive for a standard security firm. His presence didn't just fill the room, it crushed it. "Stay behind me, Miss Sterling," he said. His voice wasn't just deep, it held a resonance that vibrated in Clara's very marrow, a primal authority that made her knees weak for reasons she couldn't comprehend. "Who are you?" she gasped, clutching a heavy glass paperweight as a pathetic weapon. "The agency said they were sending a Mr. Thorne." "I am Dominic Toretto Ripley," he replied, not looking back at her. His eyes were fixed on the door, glowing with an amber intensity that seemed almost supernatural in the dim light. "And I am the only reason you will see tomorrow's sunrise." Before she could protest, the door exploded inward. But Dominic didn't flinch. He moved with a predatory grace that was far too fast, far too fluid for a human being. In a blur of motion, he intercepted the lead intruder, and the sound that followed wasn't the clash of a fight. It was the sound of a predator dismantling prey. Hello to all of our incredible viewers joining us today. It is truly wonderful to have you here for this journey into a world of secrets and ancient power. Before we dive deeper into the mystery of Dominic's true identity, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Drop your country or city in the comments below. I hope you're all doing fantastic. If you haven't already, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button and join our community. Your support allows us to keep bringing these epic stories to life, and you won't want to miss the twist coming up in the next act. Clara watched, paralyzed, as Dominic tossed the last of the three attackers through the reinforced glass window as if they weighed nothing. He didn't have a scratch on him. He didn't even seem out of breath. He turned to her then, and for a fleeting second, Clara didn't see a bodyguard. She saw a monarch. There was an ancient, terrifying weight in his gaze, a look of someone used to ruling empires, not guarding heiresses. "The perimeter is breached," Dominic stated, walking toward her. He reached out a hand, and as his fingers brushed her wrist to lead her away, a jolt of pure electricity surged through Clara's body. It wasn't just a spark, it was a recognition. Her soul felt like it was bowing. "You're not a normal bodyguard, are you?" she whispered, her voice trembling as she looked into those predatory amber eyes. Dominic leaned in close, his scent, forest rain and something dangerously metallic, enveloping her. "Normal is a luxury neither of us can afford tonight, Clara. Now, do you want to live or do you want to ask questions?" As they descended into the blackened stairwell, Clara realized the ordinary man she had hired to protect her estate was something much more dangerous. He wasn't just shielding her from the men in gray. He was hiding a power that felt like it could burn the entire city to the ground. Who exactly was Dominic Toretto Ripley, and why did the very air seem to tremble in his presence? Clara was about to find out that the man she hired to be her servant was actually a king who expected the world to kneel. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure if she wanted to run away or follow him into the fire. The armored SUV cut through the rain-slicked streets of the city like a silent predator through deep water. Inside, the silence was heavy, pressurized by the sheer physical presence of the man behind the wheel. Clara Sterling sat in the passenger seat, her hands trembling as she smoothed the silk of her ruined evening gown. She stole a glance at Dominic. In the intermittent glow of the passing streetlights, his profile looked as though it had been hacked out of granite. He wasn't just handsome, he possessed a terrifying symmetrical perfection that felt predatory. "Where are we going?" Clara whispered, her voice cracking. "My father's estate is the other way. We have a panic room there. We have security." "You have targets," Dominic interrupted, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate the very chassis of the reinforced vehicle. "Your father's estate was compromised 3 hours ago. If we go there, we are walking into a kill zone." Clara felt a cold hollow open up in her chest. Her father, the titan of the sterling global empire, was her entire world. After her mother's passing years ago, he was the only anchor she had left. My father, is he alive? For now, Dominic said, his eyes never leaving the road. He managed to get word to my associates. That is why I was sent. Not just as a bodyguard, Clara, but as a deterrent. Clara leaned back, trying to process the shift in her reality. She was a woman of logic, a corporate strategist who had spent her life navigating the boardrooms of London and New York. She dealt in data and cold facts. But Dominic Toretto Ripley didn't fit into any spreadsheet. There was an aura about him, an almost physical weight that made the air in the car feel thick, like the moments before a massive lightning strike. As they pulled into a secluded, high-walled compound hidden behind a veil of ancient oaks on the city's outskirts, the gates hissed open with a precision that suggested military-grade technology. Dominic stepped out of the car and walked around to her side. When he opened the door, he didn't just offer his hand. He stood there like a wall of muscle and silent command, waiting for her to move. This is a safe house, he stated. It is registered under a shell company. No one knows this place exists except for those I trust with my life. They entered the foyer, a minimalist space of glass and dark stone. Standing there was a woman with sharp silver-cropped hair and eyes like polished emeralds. She wore a tailored suit and held a tablet with the practiced ease of a high-level operative. Dominic, the woman said, her voice clipped. The perimeter is secure. But the council is already asking questions about your absence from the north. The council can wait, Miranda Priestley Hunt, Dominic replied, his tone brooking no argument. The girl is the priority. Clara bristled at being called the girl. I have a name. And I'd like to know why a bodyguard has a council and safe houses that look like billionaire bunkers. Miranda looked at Clara, her gaze calculating and strangely respectful. Miss Sterling, Dominic is specialized. His motivations are his own, but his capability is absolute. My job is to ensure that while he protects you, the rest of the world remains unaware of who, or what, is currently walking your streets. Dominic turned to Clara, ignoring Miranda for a moment. He stepped into Clara's personal space, and the sheer heat radiating from him made her breath catch. Up close, his eyes weren't just amber. They had gold flecks that seemed to swirl like a nebula. I know what you desire, Clara, he said softly, his voice dropping to a register that made her heart skip. You want your life back. You want to feel like the floor isn't falling out from under you. And I know what you fear, being a pawn in a game you don't understand. Clara looked up at him, her defiance flickering. And what do you want, Dominic? Why are you really here? For a split second, the mask of the professional bodyguard slipped. A look of ancient, weary hunger crossed his face. A loneliness so profound it felt like a physical weight in the room. I want what I have been denied for 300 years, he whispered so low Miranda couldn't hear. I want a reason to stop fighting. Before Clara could ask what he meant by 300 years, Dominic straightened, the cold mask snapping back into place. Miranda, get her settled in the East Wing. I need to make a call to the border. If the vultures are circling the sterling assets, they're likely crossing into my territory to do it. As Clara followed Miranda down the long, echoing hallway, she felt a strange pull toward the man in the foyer. He was a mystery wrapped in a suit, a man who spoke of territories and councils as if he were a king in exile. She felt a connection to him, not just because he saved her life, but because she saw a reflection of her own isolation in his eyes. Are you enjoying the mystery so far? Dominic is clearly more than he seems, and Clara is caught in a web far bigger than she realized. If you're loving the tension, make sure to leave a comment below with the word alpha, so I know you're ready for the next twist. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Join the family. Clara entered her room, a lavish suite that felt more like a fortress. She sat on the edge of the bed, the silence of the compound pressing in on her. She thought about Dominic's hands, how they had been so violent with the intruders, yet so strangely gentle when they touched her wrist. She wasn't just afraid for her life anymore. She was afraid of the way her heart beat faster when he was near. She was a woman who valued control, and Dominic Toretto Ripley was a force of nature that defied control. Downstairs, Dominic stood on the balcony, staring out into the dark woods. His jaw was set, his muscles coiled like a spring. He could smell the attackers from miles away, their sweat, their fear, their silver-coated bullets. They didn't know who they were dealing with. They thought they were hunting an heiress. They didn't realize they had stepped into the hunting grounds of a king who had been waiting for a reason to unleash his fury. "She's the one, isn't she?" Miranda asked, appearing in the doorway behind him. Dominic didn't turn around. "She is a client. She is the first person who has made your heart beat in a century, Dominic. Don't lie to me. I've seen you lead armies, but I've never seen you look at a woman like she was the only thing holding the world together." "The world is falling apart, Miranda," Dominic growled, his voice turning into a literal snarl that would have terrified any normal man. "And if they touch her, I will make sure there is nothing left to hold together." The secret of his lineage burned in his veins, a golden fire that demanded he claim what was his. But for now he would be the bodyguard. He would play the role of the silent protector. But the moon was rising, and with it the truth would soon be impossible to hide. The morning sun didn't bring warmth. It brought a cold, clinical clarity to the danger Clara was in. She stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of the safe house, watching the mist cling to the skeletal trees of the surrounding woods. She had barely slept, her mind looping the image of Dominic. The way he moved, the way he smelled, and that strange, haunting glow in his eyes. A soft knock at the door made her jump. "Come in," she called out, trying to steady her voice. Dominic entered. He had traded his tactical gear for a charcoal suit that fit his massive frame with lethal precision. He carried a silver tray with a single cup of black coffee and a piece of dry toast. "Eat," he commanded. It wasn't a suggestion. "We move in 10 minutes. "Move where?" "You said this was a safe house," Clara said, taking the coffee. Her fingers brushed his, and that same electric jolt, vibrant and demanding, shot up her arm. He almost dropped the cup. Dominic's gaze dropped to her hand, his nostrils flaring slightly. "It was safe until an hour ago. My scouts found a thermal signature 3 miles out. They aren't just mercenaries, Clara. They're trackers. And they're using something more advanced than GPS to find you." "What do you mean?" He stepped closer, his shadow engulfing her. "They're hunting your scent. Your bloodline carries a specific resonance, a key to the sterling vaults that is coded into your DNA. To them you're a beacon." Before she could wrap her head around the pseudoscience of it, a deafening crack echoed through the valley, the sound of a high-caliber sniper round shattering the reinforced glass of the upper balcony. "Down!" Dominic roared. He didn't just grab her. He shielded her with his entire body as they hit the marble floor. The glass rained down like diamonds, but Dominic didn't flinch. He stayed draped over her, a literal wall of muscle. Clara could feel the thunderous, steady beat of his heart against her back. It didn't feel like a human heart. It felt like a drum beating for a war. "Miranda." "Status." Dominic shouted into a comms unit on his wrist. "They've bypassed the electronic jamming, Dominic." Miranda's voice crackled through, panicked for the first time. "It's the Bane Syndicate. They've brought silverback rounds. They know who you are." Dominic's jaw tightened so hard Clara thought his teeth might shatter. "Get the transport to the extraction point. I'll take the forest path." "Dominic, that's suicide. There's a full moon rising in 12 hours, you'll be exposed." "Do it." Dominic hauled Clara to her feet. He didn't lead her to the garage. Instead, he kicked out the remaining glass of the shattered window and looked down at the 20-foot drop into the garden. "Trust me?" he asked. Clara looked into those amber eyes. Logic told her to scream. Instinct told her that this man was the only thing in the universe that was real. "Yes," she breathed. He tucked her under one arm as if she weighed nothing and leaped. They hit the ground with a soft thud that should have broken his legs, but he didn't even stumble. He hit the tree-line at a dead run, weaving through the dense foliage with a speed that blurred the world into a smear of green and brown. They hadn't gone a mile before the first of them appeared. A man wearing a high-tech exoskeleton suit crashed through the brush, leveling a sleek, silver-barreled rifle at them. "Drop the girl, Wolf," the mercenary yelled. "The syndicate wants the key and the king's head on a platter." Dominic stopped. He set Clara behind a massive oak tree. "Stay close. Your eyes," he growled. Clara didn't listen. She watched through the bark as Dominic's body seemed to expand. His suit jacket tore at the seams as his muscles swelled. A low, guttural sound, a literal snarl that originated in the depths of a cavernous chest, tore through the air. He didn't use a gun. He moved like a streak of golden light. The mercenary fired, but Dominic was already there. He tore the rifle from the man's hands like it was made of balsa wood and snapped it over his knee. Then, with a roar that shook the very leaves off the trees, he struck the mercenary's chest. The man flew backward 30 feet, denting a tree trunk upon impact. Dominic turned back to Clara. His face was flushing, his canine teeth appearing longer, sharper. He looked less like a bodyguard and more like a god of the hunt. "Dominic," she whispered, terrified but strangely mesmerized. He didn't answer. He grabbed her hand, his grip crushing yet protective, and pulled her deeper into the shadows. But they weren't alone. From the darkness of the woods, a woman stepped out. She was dressed in leather, her hair a wild mane of copper, and she held a jagged obsidian blade. "So, the great Alpha King Maximus Decimus Vane is playing house with a human girl," the woman mocked, her voice dripping with venom. "The High Council thought you were dead, Maximus. Or just hiding in your mountain. To find you here, acting as a common shield for a corporate brat, how the mighty have fallen." Clara's head spun. "Maximus? Alpha King?" She looked at the man she knew as Dominic. "Go away, Siren," Dominic, Maximus growled. "Before I forget my vow of peace and paint these woods with your blood." "You can't protect her and fight us all, my king," Siren laughed, signaling into the trees. Red laser dots began to dance across Maximus's chest. "The Syndicate has been promised the sterling fortune and we have been promised your throne. It's a fair trade." Maximus stepped in front of Clara, his back broad and shielding. He whispered over his shoulder, "Clara, whatever you see next, remember that I am on your side." As the mercenaries closed in, the air began to hum with a static charge. The inciting incident hadn't just been a kidnapping attempt. It was the start of a supernatural war, and Clara Sterling was the prize. The stakes have just skyrocketed. Dominic has a new name, a secret throne, and an army of supernatural mercenaries on his tail. Why does the Syndicate want Clara's DNA so badly? And can she handle the truth of what Maximus really is? The forest was no longer a sanctuary. It was a labyrinth of lethal shadows. Maximus, the name still tasted like iron and ancient myth in Clara's mind, dragged her through a narrow ravine, his hand a warm, unyielding shackle around hers. Behind them, the rhythmic thrum of a drone's rotors sliced through the air, a mechanical predator tracking their heat signatures. "We can't outrun a drone, Maximus." Clara gasped, her lungs burning from the thin mountain air. "And those red lasers, they're still out there." He stopped abruptly, pulling her into a shallow cave hidden behind a curtain of frozen ivy. He pressed her back against the damp stone, his body hovering inches from hers. The bodyguard persona had evaporated, replaced by the raw, magnetic intensity of a man who had ruled by the sword long before she was born. "They aren't just tracking your DNA anymore," he whispered, his breath ghosting over her lips. "They're tracking the bond." "The bond? What are you talking about?" Maximus reached out, his thumb grazing her jawline. The touch was electric, more intimate than any embrace she'd ever known. "When I touched you in that study, the ley lines of my kingdom recognized you. You aren't just a key to a bank vault, Clara. To my people, to the Leakin bloodline, you are the catalyst. The one soul capable of stabilizing a king's power, or tearing it apart." Clara stared at him, her corporate mind struggling to reconcile reality with the impossible. "You're saying I'm some kind of supernatural battery?" A rare wolfish smirk touched his lips. "I'm saying you're the only thing in this world that matters to me. And that makes you the most dangerous person alive." Before she could process the weight of his words, the drone hovered directly outside the cave. Its searchlight swept across the ivy. Maximus didn't reach for a weapon. He closed his eyes, his veins suddenly glowing with a faint, molten gold light. A low-frequency hum vibrated the very air, and suddenly the drone sparked, its rotors seizing as it plummeted into the ravine below. "How did you do that?" she breathed. "Willpower," he said simply. "But it cost us our location. They know I've used my signature. We have to move. Now." They hiked for hours, climbing higher into the jagged peaks where the air grew cold enough to crystallize their breath. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in bruises of purple and orange, they reached a derelict hunting lodge. Inside it was dusty and smelled of cedar, but it was defensible. Maximus moved with practiced efficiency, barricading the door and checking the perimeter. When he finally turned back to her, The moonlight was beginning to bleed through the slats in the roof. Clara was shivering not just from the cold but from the realization that her life, her father, her company, her very identity, was gone. "I'm sorry," she whispered, sitting on a moth-eaten rug. Maximus paused, a heavy beam in his hands. "For what?" "For hiring you. For dragging you into this. If I had just let them take me." He dropped the beam and was across the room in 2 strides. He knelt before her, his massive hands framing her face. "Listen to me, Clara O'Hara Windsor," he said, using the naming convention she didn't yet realize was her true ancestral lineage. "I have spent 3 centuries looking for a reason to care if the sun rose. You are not a burden. You are the first breath of air I've taken in an eternity." The tension between them snapped. The fear, the adrenaline, and the strange ancient recognition culminated in a kiss that felt like a collision of worlds. It was desperate and hungry, a silent vow exchanged in the ruins of a lodge. In that moment, Clara didn't care that he was a king or a wolf. She only knew that he was hers. But as they pulled apart, the air outside grew deathly still. The wolves in the distance stopped howling. "They're here," Maximus growled, his eyes shifting back to that terrifying, beautiful amber. "And they didn't come alone." From the darkness outside, a voice boomed, deep, cultured, and chillingly familiar. "Maximus, bring the girl out, and perhaps I'll let you die as a king instead of a stray dog." Clara's heart stopped. She knew that voice. "Father," she whispered. "The betrayal is deep and the tension is at a breaking point." Was Clara's father involved in her kidnapping all along? And what does the O'Hara Windsor name really mean? Things are getting intense and we're only halfway through. The voice outside didn't just belong to her father. It belonged to a ghost. Clara pushed past Maximus, her boots thudding against the rotting floorboards of the lodge. Through the gaps in the boarded-up windows she saw him. Arthur O'Hara Windsor stood in the clearing, flanked by men in tactical gear. But these weren't the gray-suited mercenaries from the city. They wore black capes over modern armor, bearing a crest Clara had only seen in her father's oldest, leather-bound books. A crown entwined with a wolf's tail. "Father!" Clara screamed, her voice cracking the frozen silence. "What is this? Why are they pointing guns at us?" Arthur stepped forward, the moonlight catching the silver handle of his walking stick. "Step away from him, Clara. You've been a brave girl playing along with this stray. But the game is over. You're coming home to the council." Maximus placed a heavy, protective hand on Clara's shoulder, pulling her back into the shadows of the lodge. "He isn't your father, Clara. Not in the way you think. Don't listen to his lies, Maximus." Arthur shouted, his eyes flashing a brief, sickly yellow. "I am the regent of the Southern Territories. I've spent 25 years hiding her from your kind, waiting for her blood to mature. The sterling fortune? A facade. A way to fund the search for the lunar key, which is currently standing right next to you." Clara looked between the 2 men, the world tilting on its axis. "The lunar key? You mean, me? You lied to me my whole life? My mother, the company, it was all a cover." "Your mother was a queen of the high court, Clara," Maximus whispered, his voice thick with a grief he had carried for centuries. "She was executed by the council, by men like Arthur, because she refused to turn you over to be used as a weapon. I wasn't just hired to be your bodyguard yesterday. I've been watching over you from the shadows since the day you were born." The revelation hit Clara like a physical blow. The routine assignment wasn't a coincidence. The man she thought was a stranger had been her silent guardian for 2 decades. "You knew," Clara whispered, turning to Maximus. "You knew who I was this whole time?" "I knew you were the one I was sworn to protect," Maximus said, his amber eyes softening with a devastating vulnerability. "But I didn't know that meeting you would make me want to abandon my crown just to hear you laugh. I didn't know I would fall in love with the I was supposed to just keep safe." "Enough of this sentimentality," Arthur roared. He raised his hand and the soldiers leveled their silver-tipped rifles. "Maximus, you are a king without a kingdom. Your people have forgotten you. Hand her over and I will let you return to your mountains. Refuse and I will burn this forest with both of you inside it." Maximus stepped out onto the porch, leaving Clara in the safety of the interior. He stood tall, his silhouette framed by the rising full moon. The charcoal suit he wore seemed to pulse with an inner light. "You forget, Arthur," Maximus growled, and the sound wasn't just a threat. It was a command that made the very trees tremble. I didn't lose my kingdom because I was weak. I left it because I was bored of blood. But for her, I will remember how to be a monster. In a terrifying display of power, Maximus didn't shift into a wolf. Instead, he raised his hand, and the shadows of the forest itself seemed to detach from the trees. The darkness flowed toward him like liquid silk, coiling around his arms and forming a blade of pure, solidified night. The midpoint, Arthur hissed, backing away. He's reclaiming the shadow core. Clara watched from the window, her heart racing. She realized then that the danger wasn't just the men outside. It was the world she had been born into. She wasn't an ordinary heiress, and the man protecting her wasn't an ordinary king. They were two halves of an ancient prophecy, and the explosion of light that followed was the sound of the status quo shattering forever. The truth is finally out. Clara is a queen in hiding, and Maximus has been her guardian for a lifetime. But with her father leading the enemy, who can she really trust? The stakes have never been higher as we head into the darkest hour. The clearing exploded into a chaotic symphony of silver and shadow. As Maximus unleashed the shadow core, the very ground beneath the hunting lodge groaned. But Arthur wasn't a fool. He had prepared for this moment for 25 years. He didn't order his men to fire at Maximus. He pointed his silver-topped cane directly at the lodge's structural beams. "Fire!" Arthur screamed. The incendiary rounds didn't whistle, they hissed. Within seconds, the dry, ancient wood of the lodge was engulfed in a chemical green flame, a fire designed to burn through supernatural protection. "Clara!" Maximus roared, his shadow blade dissipating as he lunged toward the porch. But a net of shimmering silver mesh, weighted with heavy lead stones, dropped from the canopy above. It wasn't designed to kill him. It was designed to suppress his cellular regeneration. Maximus hit the ground, the silver searing his skin, the smell of ozone and burning ozone filling the air. He snarled, his muscles bulging as he tried to tear the mesh, but every movement sent a fresh jolt of agony through his nervous system. Inside the lodge, Clara was trapped. The green fire climbed the walls with unnatural speed, cutting off the exit. The smoke was thick, smelling of sulfur and old secrets. She coughed, dropping to her knees, her lungs screaming for air. Through the haze, she saw the silhouette of a man entering through the back window. Not Maximus, but one of Arthur's elite hunters. "Don't struggle, Your Highness," the man sneered, his face obscured by a gas mask. "The regent wants you breathing, but he didn't say you had to be conscious." He lunged, and Clara felt the sharp sting of a sedative needle in her neck. The world began to tilt, the roar of the fire fading into a dull hum. The last thing she saw before the darkness took her was Maximus, pinned to the earth by a dozen silver spears, his eyes fixed on the burning building with a look of such profound, agonizing despair that it hurt worse than the fire. "Maximus!" She choked out, but her hand slipped from the windowsill. When she woke, the world was cold and gray. She wasn't in the forest. She was in a sterile white room that smelled of antiseptic and power. Her wrists were bound to a chair with cuffs that hummed with a low-frequency vibration, neutralizing the dormant power Maximus had told her about. Across from her, Arthur sat behind a mahogany desk, calmly sipping tea. "You look like your mother when you're angry, Clara," he said, his voice devoid of the warmth she had known for 2 decades. She had that same stubborn set to her jaw right before the council took her head. "You murdered her," Clara rasped, her throat raw. "And you used me. Every birthday, every graduation, it was all just an investment for you. I am a businessman, Clara. And you are the most valuable asset on the planet. With your blood, I can bridge the gap between the human world and the Leaken territories. I won't just be a regent. I'll be the architect of a new world order." "Maximus will kill you," she spat. Arthur laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "Maximus is currently in the pit, a silver-lined cell 300 feet below this facility. By sunrise, the silver will have turned his blood to lead. He isn't coming for you, Clara. No one is." He stood up, leaning over her, his eyes cold and predatory. "Tonight we begin the extraction. It will be painful but necessary. You should have stayed an ordinary heiress. Love is a very poor shield against destiny." He turned and walked out, the heavy steel door clicking shut with a finality that felt like a coffin lid. Clara sat in the silence, the vibrating cuffs biting into her skin. She was alone. Her father was a monster, her protector was dying in a pit of silver, and the power she supposedly possessed felt like a curse she didn't know how to use. She lowered her head and sobbed, not for her life, but for the man who had spent 300 years waiting for a reason to live, only to find it in a girl he couldn't save. The silence of the White Room was the loudest sound she had ever heard. It was the sound of hope dying. This is the darkest hour. Maximus is neutralized and Clara is at the mercy of a man who sees her only as a biological key. Is this really how the story ends? In a world of kings and monsters, is love enough to break through silver and steel? I need to know if you're still with me. This part was heavy, but the turnaround is coming. Drop a hope in the comments if you want to see Clara fight back. And if you're enjoying the emotional roller coaster, please subscribe and help us grow. The sterile white of the cell wasn't just cold. It was a vacuum sucking the very soul out of Clara. She stared at the vibrating cuffs, the hum vibrating through her bones until her teeth ached. Ordinary, she whispered to the empty room. He said I thought I hired an ordinary bodyguard. But as the sedative fully cleared her system, a different kind of warmth began to stir in the center of her chest. It wasn't the heat of the green fire or the fever of fear. It was a rhythmic pulsing glow that felt exactly like the static charge she'd felt whenever Maximus touched her. You are the catalyst, his voice echoed in her mind. The only soul capable of stabilizing a king's power. If she could stabilize it, she realized with a jolt of adrenaline she could also summon it. She closed her eyes, blocking out the hum of the dampeners. She didn't think about the sterling fortune or the boardrooms. She thought about the forest, the scent of rain on charcoal, and the way Maximus had looked at her like she was the North Star. She stopped fighting the cuffs. She leaned into the vibration, matching her own heartbeat to the frequency of the machines. Slowly, the gold flecks she had seen in Maximus's eyes began to swirl behind her own eyelids. The air in the room grew heavy, the oxygen ionizing. In the pit 300 feet below, Maximus lay in a pool of his own silver-poisoned blood. His heart was slowing, the metallic toxins turning his veins into lead. But then he felt it. A tether. A golden thread of pure, unadulterated willpower snapping across the distance between them. Clara. His eyes snapped open, glowing with a renewed, celestial fire. The silver spears embedded in his shoulders began to smoke, then melt. The pit wasn't a coffin, it was a forge. Back in the lab, the monitors began to wail. The light bulbs overhead flickered and shattered. Clara opened her eyes and they weren't brown anymore. They were a brilliant, molten honey. She didn't pull against the cuffs. She simply exhaled and the metal shattered like glass. The door hissed open and Miranda Priestley Hunt slipped inside, her emerald eyes wide with shock. She wasn't carrying a tablet this time. She was carrying 2 jagged daggers made of dragon glass. I thought I'd have to break you out, Miranda whispered, a smirk playing on her lips. But it seems the Queen has finally decided to take her throne. Where is he? Clara asked, her voice sounding like the roll of distant thunder. Coming up the hard way, Miranda replied, tossing Clara a tactical jacket. The Syndicate is in chaos. Maximus is tearing through the sublevels. But Arthur has called in the High Council's heavy hitters. If we don't reach the roof in 5 minutes, they'll level this entire facility to keep you from uniting. Clara gripped the jacket, her fear replaced by a cold, sharp purpose. He won't level anything. This is my house now. They sprinted into the hallway, bypassing the dazed guards. The facility was shaking, the structural alarms screaming. As they reached the central atrium, the floor buckled. A massive silhouette crashed through the concrete from below, surrounded by a whirlwind of shadow and golden sparks. Maximus stood there, his suit shredded, his skin scarred by silver, but looking more powerful than he ever had in the forest. He looked at Clara and for a second the war stopped. You found the spark, he said, his voice a prideful growl. I found the fire, Maximus, she replied. He reached out and as their hands met, a shockwave of energy blasted outward, blowing out every window in the atrium. The bodyguard and the heiress were gone. Standing in the ruins were a king and his queen, finally united, finally ready to end the reign of the men who had kept them in the dark. The tide has turned. Clara has embraced her power, and Maximus has risen from the depths of despair. The final confrontation is looming, and the traitors are about to learn why you never provoke an alpha king, or the woman he loves. Are you ready for the climax? I've been waiting to write this part. If you're cheering for Clara and Maximus, hit that like button and type "Rain" in the comments. Make sure you're subscribed because the next part is going to be legendary. The roof of the Syndicate's mountain stronghold was a jagged helipad suspended over a 2,000-foot drop. The storm had finally broken, leaving the air thin, freezing, and charged with the scent of impending ozone. Arthur O'Hara Windsor stood by the idling rotors of a matte black Beetle transport, his face twisted into a mask of aristocratic fury. Beside him stood the High Council's heavy hitters, 4 hulking figures in silver-etched power armor, their visors glowing with a cold, synthetic blue. "You should have stayed in the pit, Maximus," Arthur screamed over the howl of the wind. "And you, Clara, you've destroyed a billion-dollar legacy for a beast." Maximus stepped onto the helipad, his every footstep cracking the reinforced concrete. The shadow core wasn't just a blade now. It was an aura, a swirling vortex of darkness that made the physical world seem to bleed at the edges. Clara stood at his side, her hand locked in his. The golden light in her veins was no longer a flicker. It was a sun, radiating a heat that melted the frost off the metal around them. "The legacy was built on the blood of my mother, Arthur." Clara's voice rang out, amplified by the power surging through her. "It ends tonight. Kill them," Arthur commanded, retreating toward the transport. "Bring me the girl's heart if you have to. We only need the marrow." The 4 armored giants lunged. They moved with a mechanical precision, their silver-edged claymores whistling through the air. Maximus met the first 2 head-on, his strength tripled by the connection to Clara. He caught a silver blade with his bare hand, the metal hissing against his skin, and shattered it with a guttural roar. He wasn't just fighting as a man, he was fighting as the Alpha King, his movements a blur of tooth, claw, and shadow. But the other 2 attackers pivoted, flanking Clara. They knew she was the source. One leveled a sonic pulse cannon, the barrel glowing as it prepped a blast that would liquefy human bone. "Clara now!" Maximus yelled, pinned between the 2 swordsmen. Clara didn't flinch. She reached deep into that well of ancient memory Maximus had unlocked. She didn't see the soldiers, she saw the ley lines of the earth itself. She slammed her palms onto the cold concrete. "Kneel," she commanded. The gold light didn't just flash, it erupted. A shockwave of pure ancestral authority slammed into the armored giants. The sonic cannon backfired, exploding in a shower of sparks. The heavy hitters were thrown backward, their power suits seizing as the supernatural surge fried their electronics. They hit the perimeter fence, the high-voltage wires lighting up the night sky. Maximus finished the remaining 2 with a devastating sweep of his shadow blade, cleaving through their silver armor as if it were parchment. He turned, his chest heaving, his amber eyes locked on Arthur, who was scrambling into the cockpit of the transport. "It's over, Arthur," Maximus growled, leaping onto the wing of the craft. With one hand he tore the reinforced cockpit glass away like a discarded candy wrapper. He reached in and dragged Arthur out by his expensive silk tie, dropping him onto the hard concrete at Clara's feet. The regent looked small now, a fragile, greedy man stripped of his hired shadows. "Please," Arthur whimpered, looking up at the daughter he had spent 20 years molding into a tool. "Clara, I raised you. I gave you everything." Clara looked down at him, her eyes burning with a regal, terrifying calm. "You gave me a cage and called it a kingdom. You gave me a bodyguard and forgot that a king doesn't just protect, he conquers." She looked at Maximus. For a moment the air grew still. The satisfying twist wasn't a killing blow. "I won't kill you, Arthur," Clara said softly. "That would be too easy. I'm turning you over to the true High Council, the one Miranda has been secretly contacting since we arrived. They don't take kindly to regents who steal from the royal bloodlines." From the clouds above, 3 more transports descended, these ones bearing the crest of the White Wolf, the ancient allies of Maximus's house. Miranda stood at the edge of the roof, signaling them down. Maximus walked over to Clara, the shadows receding into his skin, leaving him looking human once more, though the sheer power in his gaze remained. He took her hand, his thumb stroking her knuckles. "You did it," he whispered. "You claimed the throne." "No," Clara said, leaning her forehead against his. "We claimed it. Together." As the council soldiers swarmed the roof to take Arthur into custody, the sun began to peek over the horizon. The long night of the bodyguard and the heiress was over. The reign of the king and queen had begun. Justice has been served. The villains are defeated, the secrets are out, and Clara has proven she's more than just a key, she's a ruler. But what does the future hold for a king in exile and a queen who just found her crown? We're almost at the end. If you loved that showdown, make sure to leave a comment with the word triumph. And if you want to see how their story concludes, hit that subscribe button so you're the first to see our next epic upload. The gold-streaked dawn of the Southern Territories didn't just bring light. It brought a silence that the city had never known. Clara stood on the balcony of the ancestral O'Hara-Windsor estate, a sprawling stone fortress that had been returned to her by the High Council within 48 hours of Arthur's arrest. The air here smelled of pine needles and ancient, untamed magic, a far cry from the exhaust and cold steel of her former life. She looked down at her hands. The vibrating cuffs were gone, replaced by a signet ring of heavy gold, a twin to the one Maximus wore. She felt different, centered, grounded, and for the first time in 25 years completely whole. A heavy, familiar warmth settled against her back. Maximus wrapped his arms around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. He was dressed in a simple black sweater, the lethal edge of the Alpha King, softened by the peace of the morning. "The council has finished their audit," he murmured, his voice a low, soothing rumble in her ear. "The sterling assets are being liquidated and moved into a trust for the Leakin refugees. You've done more for our people in 2 days than Arthur did in 2 decades. Clara leaned back into him, sighing with content. "I spent my life thinking I was building a corporate empire. It turns out I was just practicing for a real one." "And the boardrooms?" Maximus teased, his lips grazing the shell of her ear. "Do you miss the ordinary life of a billionaire heiress?" Clara turned in his arms, looping her hands around his neck. She looked into those amber eyes, eyes that no longer hunted for enemies, but looked at her with a devotion that spanned centuries. "I'd trade 1,000 boardrooms for one night in the forest with you. As long as you're the one guarding the door." "I'm not your bodyguard anymore, Clara," he said, his expression turning serious, though his eyes danced with light. "I am your equal. Your king. Your husband if you'll still have a man who once threw your attackers through a window." Clara laughed, a bright, genuine sound that echoed off the stone walls. "I think I can manage. But you have to promise me one thing." "Anything. No more secrets. No more routine assignments. If there's a supernatural war or a hidden kingdom, I want to be the one holding the map." Maximus smiled, a slow, breathtaking expression that transformed his rugged face. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, weathered leather book, the journal he had kept while watching over her for all those years. "It's all in here. Every moment I spent loving you from afar. Here's now. Our history and our future." As they stood on the balcony, the first rays of the sun hit the valley below, revealing a crowd of people, both human and Leakin, who had gathered to see their new leaders. There was no fear in the crowd, only a burgeoning hope. The division that had been fueled by men like Arthur was crumbling, replaced by the union of the Catalyst and her king. Clara looked out at the horizon, seeing not an end but a beginning. She had hired a bodyguard to save her life, and he had ended up giving her a soul. They had navigated danger, faced betrayal, and emerged not just survivors but architects of a new world. "Ready?" Maximus asked, offering his hand. Clara took it, her fingers interlocking with his. "Ready." They stepped forward together, leaving the shadows of the past behind. In a world where power and love had finally collided, they had found the only thing that truly mattered: each other. And that, my dear viewers, is the end of our story. From a routine protection job to the reclaiming of a throne, Clara and Maximus proved that even the darkest secrets can't stand against a love that is destined to rule. I truly hope you enjoyed this journey. This was one of our most emotional scripts yet, and your support means the world to us. If you loved the ending, please give this video a huge thumbs up. What was your favorite part? Was it the moment Clara found her power or Maximus's rise from the pit? Let me know in the comments below. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new story. Thank you for watching, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.